Howdy. Well, the presentation today is on a homemade hardware keylogger and also a FUKD hybrid. Essentially, I'm trying to combine two concepts into one with some mixed success, and we're going to talk about that during the presentation. A little bit about me. My name is Aiden Crenshaw. I run irongeek.com. That's my Twitter ID if anybody wants to follow me. Not sure why, but there you go. I have an interest in InfoSec education. I'm just a geek with time on my hands. I don't necessarily know everything, so if I have anything wrong, let me know after the fact. And also, I'm a regular on the ISD podcast. And co-founder of DerbyCon.
Woo!
Woohoo! Yay,
DerbyCon!
Yay, DerbyCon! Did you see the animation? Yeah.
Wow. Looking fancy.
Alright, first of all, a little bit on what hardware keyloggers are. A lot of times I'll start talking about keyloggers, especially in an academic setting, and people automatically think software keyloggers. Now, I mean hardware keyloggers. And conceptually, these things are fairly simple. Essentially, plug in one end into your keyboard, one end into your computer itself, and logs everything that goes through. You have extra features on some, like time stamping. Some actually do encryption on the storage. Various odds and ends like that. Most of them aren't hopefully that big. Those PS2 ones, USB ones. I have a whole set of them up here. And one of the things that gets me is people who say, well, I mean, people are going to obviously see that behind your computer. I've had, people with documents tell me that. I'm like, you crawl behind your computer that often to see this? If it's up on your desk, maybe. But some of these are fairly surreptitious, like this one. And you can sit there and log what people are typing, things like passwords, documents, what web pages they're going to. There's all sorts of information. Now, how this all started out was, originally I wanted free toys. And I wanted to get a bunch of these hardware keyloggers to play around with, but they're kind of expensive. I mean, I'll show you a slide here in a bit where it shows the average price, but the cheaper ones are like 33 bucks. The more expensive ones are like 300. I probably like got $600 or $700 for keyloggers just up here in this bag. So I wanted to get all these keyloggers to play around with. And there's different types. There's PS2, USB. You see one that's plugged into my PC at home, or PC I had at home at one time. There's internal ones as well that you can actually put inside the keyboard or on the PCI bus and sit there and look at keystrokes for you. Now, there's all sorts of ways that vendors like to advertise these things for, and most of them are bullshit. One of them they talk about is writers could use them as a form of backup. I don't know about how you guys write documents, but when I'm writing a document, I'm like, up here, down here, copy, paste, move over here. All right, got spelling error there, got to fix that, typo here, okay. No way in hell I'd be able to use one of these things as backup recovery. Maybe if you have more linear thought process than I've got, you might be able to use that.
Forget about using a mouse for a while.
Yeah, I have my serious doubts about that. Also, if you're a coder, you're even less so. Especially considering the price of these versus just buying a hard drive and making sure you set up automatic backups. But this is one excuse they give for selling them. Another one is businesses might be able to use them to monitor what the employees are doing. But if you're a business, you're probably going to roll out something via GPO or some kind of script, a software keylogger that gives you more information about what applications people use. It gives you more granular control and reports back. Parents, that's a possibility. But even here, I think a software keylogger would probably work better for most parents, because how bright does your kid have to be to see this on the back of a machine and pull it off if they find it? And this one's probably a lot more in line. Pin testers, crackers, spies, and jealous significant others. I imagine that last category is actually what makes most of the sales, even though they don't want to necessarily say that. People who basically want to snoop on others. And hardware keyloggers do have the advantages, which I'll cover here in a second. Now keep in mind, the legality one is kind of questionable. I think there has been a few court cases, I think mostly involving spouses and so forth. But what I'm thinking of, I think involves a software keylogger. It's possible, depending on the law you encounter, these might be considered wiretapping devices. Even though most of those laws are written for telephone, they have been applied to other technical venues. So, your mileage may vary, and I think the legality of using these is questionable depending on the environment you're using them in. Now, there's various cons, and I'm a very negative kind of person, so I'll cover the cons of these hardware keyloggers versus software keyloggers first. First of all, it's harder to recover the keystrokes remotely. There's a few hardware keyloggers out there where you can actually get close to them and wirelessly recover the keystrokes. You like use a Bluetooth interface or a Wi-Fi interface, connect to the keylogger and dump your keystrokes that way. So you only really need to get close physical access while you're installing it. But there are some exceptions to this. There's people who've been messing around with catching electrical interference and using that to tell what keystrokes people are typing. But if you ever watch one of those demo videos, you see them going through turning off all the fans in the building and turning off all of the electrical components because there's so much EM noise out there. So I have my questions about that. There's people who've been messing around with sniffing Bluetooth connections and so forth. I also have this idea, which I've never actually implemented because I'm not much of a social engineering guy. I usually make the joke that I use my personality as birth control, so I'm not sure I can pull this one off, but I'm hopefully I get one of my friends to try it. I always want to see if I could get someone to install one of these for me and mail it back to me by saying, well, I got this special piece of software for you. You can have it for free. Here's a licensing dongle. You don't even take a USB port with it. You just plug it in line with your keyboard. So it doesn't even take a USB port. And run this software, you're fine. Give them the demo version. When it expires, tell them, oh crap, I must have gave you a bad licensing dongle. Why don't you mail that back to me? I'll send you a good one. So use your imagination a little bit there. Another problem with hardware keyloggers is you get a little bit less information. Generally speaking, you're not going to know what application someone types something into. You have a general idea, like if you see Control-Delete, type something, tab, type something, the person's probably logging into the machine. If you see www, you figure they're probably typing into a web browser. Probably. So you get less information from these hardware keyloggers. Also, they're fairly expensive, which I'll be covering here in a minute. And they're very easy to remove if found, assuming they're not one of the internal ones I showed earlier. Now the pros, of course, is stealth. Most of your free hardware, free software keyloggers are going to be detected by AV, and probably some of your commercial ones as well. So these, generally speaking, the good ones are completely passive. You don't even see them enumerated as a device. And if you do see them enumerated as a device, I think one of mine had, it showed up as a hub-type device, which, if you look at the vendor and product ID, it belonged to Texas Instruments. It was fairly innocuous. So they're fairly stealthy in that sense, and most of them are completely passive. You don't see this anything when it doesn't, well, it really doesn't technically enumerate, it just passes everything through. All keystrokes can be logged despite boot state. So software keylogger, you're not going to get the BIOS password, for instance. With one of these, you can. Also, it doesn't matter what OS it is, Linux, Windows, as long as it supports that particular type of keyboard. Now, I have a whole bunch of hardware keyloggers with me. Here's just a few examples. The way you normally recover keystrokes from these is either you go into Notepad or Emacs, VI, whatever. Here's a key sequence, and it will type out its entire logs. And there's a few of them that you hit a key sequence on the keyboard, and it becomes a thumb drive, and you can copy a text file off to get your logs back. And here's just a few of them, and the prices range from like one particular key carbon, it's like $150 to about $300, depending on what features you get. I think the higher end one has like time date stamping, which might be useful if you're doing some kind of, if you want to know when who types something in for sure, or at least have a better idea of it. Probably be good. But you see the prices range from about $40 to $300, and a few that probably even more than that. Now, as far as detection and mitigation, of course, the best thing is physical inspection. Though, if it's an internal hardware keylogger, the chances of you spotting that's not that high, unless you really start looking. But those were probably, at least the PCI ones, I have to imagine are enumerated. I actually don't have one of those to play with yet. You can sometimes lock down what USB hardware can be installed, but most of these are completely passive, so you're not going to be able to. There's one particular one, if you can recognize its particular vendor ID and product ID, you might be able to block that. Both Windows and Linux, there's ways to go in and say block this particular USB device by its serial number, vendor ID, or product ID. In Windows, there's registry settings you can make to do that, and in Linux, you can use UDEF rules. I have a whole other talk that covers that. I'll link to that in a bit. Oh, physical security is actually what the first thing I wanted to cover was. Basically making sure people don't get a chance to come into your facility and install these in the first place. And also, sometimes you'll notice weird problems, and I had a lot of this today. I thought my hardware keylogger was getting pretty foolproof and very reliable. Then I tried a couple of keyboards besides the ones I have sitting around my office, and it proved to be a little bit less reliable than I originally had hoped. Sometimes when you plug one of these in line, well, I already mentioned odd vendor ID and some product IDs if it's not completely passive. Some of them, even they are passive, you plug a USB device in series with them, a USB device that should be, well, let's say you have a hub built into your keyboard. Well, you plug a thumb drive in a hub that should be doing USB 2, and all of a sudden it's running at 1.1 speeds. That might give you an idea that something's wrong. Or it doesn't work at all. That might give you an idea that something's up. Also, some hardware keyloggers seem to have problems with certain keyboards on certain computers. Like I have this one particular hardware keylogger, I don't remember which model it was now, that if I use a certain Dell keyboard on a certain Dell PC, it would not work. Same keyboard, different PC, it would work. Same PC, different keyboard, it would work. So, there's all sorts of variables there. So I started thinking about, well, can I make my own? I mean, 40 bucks is a bit much, and I'm incredibly cheap. So I've been messing around with the Tince for a while, and I think Dave, for instance, ended on the Tince here before.
Yeah.
So you've seen him do some stuff with set and the Tince. And so I was like, I'm familiar with the Tince, I'm getting familiar with the Arduino environment, so can I put together something with hobbyist electronics that will do what I want? And the great thing about using an Arduino-based platform is so many people have been developing extra code for peripherals. So hopefully most of the code would already be out there for me in one form or another, or at least I'd have examples. I mean, there's already a micro SD shield that I can find for the Tince. Not quite a shield, but you can solder it on and it just fits right on top. So I can write the micro SD card, no problem. The idea of combining both a keystroke logger and a programmer head was so I could see what keystrokes people were making and vary payloads based on them. For instance, I could screw some of these keystrokes and whenever they sign their name, erase their name and put someone else's as a joke, or possibly look for Control-Delete something, tab something, record their username and password and replay it later to do some various misdeeds. And another major thing I was fond about was, going back to what you said, was Arduino. So many people have been developing on it that adding extra peripherals to this should be fairly easy, because there's people who have developed code already for interfacing with Wi-Fi devices, Bluetooth, Ethernet. So if I wanted to be able to recover my keystrokes later on via Bluetooth, or even have it send it over a network via Ethernet, but still be a hardware keylogger, there's possibilities there. The particular device I'm using is the Tince, and for those who haven't seen previous talks on it, it's not quite as big as 2 postage stamps. That's the thing right there. It cost about 16 bucks. Originally started using it because it will emulate a USB keyboard device, no problem. A human interface device. You can just send any keystrokes you want. And it was like the easiest device I could find for doing that. Originally, so many people were turning off Autorun from like U3 USB drives. I was like, well, I gotta find something else. Few to nobody I know actually blocks USB HID devices. So you can have this run commands for you. Dave and Josh have done all sorts of work with performing other kinds of payloads, actually using staged Metasploit payloads and so forth, and launching them all from a Tince. But a few ideas for payloads. You add a user, run a program, copy files to a thumb drive for later retrieval. I have examples of this on my website. Upload local files, download and install apps, or even do like it's something similar to a cross-site request forgery, sort of. It's vaguely like that. Where if you know someone uses a certain website regularly, have this send all the right keystrokes to make a transaction for them. Like I used to have it coded up to where it would go out to Facebook mobile and make a post for them. So there's all sorts of options. Now, I'm going to eventually demo what I've built, and hopefully it's going to work decently for me right now. But a few of the things you have to set up first if you want to develop one of these is I had to get the Arduino dev package. Arduino is essentially, the best way I can describe it is dumbed down C++. Some of the things that are more painful about the C++ programming languages has been simplified for you. It's really at this point about as easy as basic. You're also going to need the Tince Arduino and possibly the serial drivers. To this particular board, you can program in raw C, or you can use Arduino. And to use Arduino, though, you have to take the extra libraries. And those are all available on the Tince Arduino website, PJRC. He has a few other products as well. You also need the Tince loader to program it. And the PHUKD library is basically a library I wrote to make sending various types of keystrokes easier. Like I have functions in there for going out to the Windows Start and typing a command or going into Linux, and if you're using GNOME and bring down essentially a start bar, go out to a terminal, type something. There's even ones in there for OS X that other people have submitted, and I can't seem to actually keep my hands on this thing. Alright. Since you have to go in there, copy the libraries into wherever you put your Arduino environment into libraries, and select your board type, and you're good. Now, as far as parts for my keyloggers, it depends on whether I'm talking about PS2 or USB keylogger. Tince is about 16 bucks. If you're making a PS2 keylogger, female cable is probably free if you want to cut it off an old KVM cable. SD adapter is about 8 bucks, and the USB host shield, if you're going to make a USB keylogger, the one I'm using currently is about $15, though I've seen them on sale for like, I think 10 or 11. Libraries I mentioned before, the FUKD library which I'm using. Also there's a Tince PS2 library. Unfortunately it didn't quite work for me, so I had to modify it. But my source code's out on my website, and I'll show you a link here in a bit, and these slides will be up on my website before long also. Or at least a version of them. I had to modify the PS2 library to work for me. The PS2 connection is kind of like a serial interface, and the library that I originally had didn't have all the functionality I needed. So I added some extra stuff, and that's included with my source code. And also, I was using the FAT16 library originally, but if you go with Arduino 1.0, I'm not sure, they may have had it in previous versions as well, this library is already there for writing to an SD card that just come built in. So I've been using those. And first, a little bit about the PS2 keylogger. The way this one's put together is, as mentioned before, PS2 is kind of like a serial interface in a way. You have these scan codes that are being fed in. Well, the code on the Arduino can directly read these scan codes once you have the library. And for instance, for key A, you might get a scan code 1C, and when it's released, it's F01C. You see that, you know an A was pressed. So what's essentially happening with my PS2 hardware keylogger, it sees that coming in a PS2 port, and it replays it out the USB port. So it's PS2 in, USB out, so it also kind of acts as a PS2 USB adapter. Essentially it's wired up like this. I cut the cable apart, looked at the various pins, and I used Wikipedia as my data sheet for the pins, and wired it up as such, interfaced it into the Tince, powered up my SD card, and used some code that I have up on my website already, and essentially everything that comes in, it writes to the thumb drive, bases payloads on it, sorry, writes to the SD card, bases payloads on it, and replays it out the USB interface. And I was going to demo it, but essentially it's going to look just like my USB one, other than it has a different connector and different code base. If I was to pull one out, it's essentially what I have in this little baggie right here. Yes, I did get through the TSA lineup with all this crud. Don't ask me how. They didn't have any pause about all this crud I brought with me, all the flashing lights and wires and other stuff, but they ran my code through a couple times.
Oh yeah, no worries, just plug it in.
I think it was the challenge coins or something. Now, other than my SD card adapter missing there, that is essentially all the wiring there is to the PS2 hardware keylogger. And eventually, of course, you want to make that onto a proto board, make something a little smaller, prettier packaging. But for demo purposes, that's what I created for PS2. Now, the USB I'm actually going to demo. And I've been tentatively calling this the user recording programmable hid USB keyboard dongle, or the You're Fucked. Some people say I have a sophomoric sense of humor.
I agree.
I love you too, Dave. Alright, now to actually program this, I found out after I got this little board for, I think I bought mine on sale for like 12 bucks, 11 bucks, whatever. I had to have an extra PIC programmer to write to it. But I also had to fight with the company. They said, well, we give you 2 different firmwares. You don't need the source code. I'm like, you know, if you really want to sell a lot of these things, the source code's not doing you any good. Release the source code so people can hack the hell out of them. So I got the source code from them and simplified the HID reports it gives me. I'll show you those in a second, to make it easier for me to parse. So I had to get the code from Shure Electronics, and they seem like nice folks, but they speak some serious English. And it's a little hard interfacing with them at times, but they got me the source code I needed and modified it. Used the PIC. Well, I used a particular PIC compiler. I used MPLab IDEX. You can just download that for free from Microchip's website. I'm not using the light option, so I don't have all the optimizations, but it was good enough for my project. And I had to use the Picket2 programmer, Because unlike my Tince, which you can just plug into a micro USB adapter, or well, micro USB cable, sorry, mini USB cable, and program directly, you need an extra external programmer for one of these. And I think the PHUKD, if you get the clone version, which is what I'm using, costs about 20 bucks. If you don't want to actually write any code of your own, I already have precompiled hex files that you can just use the programmer and just write directly to it without having to do any coding of your own. Now the way this one's wired up, essentially it interfaces with the Tince via a UART connection, just a simple serial connection into the Tince, and anything that comes in through the USB interface is translated into essentially a HID report, which I'll show you here in a second. It can parse out and goes, okay, this is the HID report for the character A. This is the HID report for holding down the control key, so on and so forth. It's also interfaced into the SD adapter so it can write stuff to it. And I'll show you the code. There's a lot of code to it, but I think it's fairly simple to understand. Although you start messing around with Tince, you're talking about something with like 2.5K of RAM. So it becomes really important to use smaller data types for your variables. I mean, I ran into some serious issues. I ended up having to store a lot of my strings into the flash on the device. Well, not this device, that device. Otherwise, I'd take up all the RAM and my device wouldn't actually function anymore. But when you hit that level, some things would function and some things wouldn't, and it wouldn't make any sense. So debugging one of these is a massive pain. All right, HID reports. I kept mentioning HID reports. Originally, when I got the source code from Sure Electronics, the report I got looked a little bit of like what you see on the your far right. Unfortunately, that's a lot of pain to actually parse. I don't need those dashes. I don't need it saying HID raw report every single time. So it took a little convincing, and they finally sent it to me. And I modified it to get a little bit simpler report. Now what mine looks like is essentially like what's on the right. That's actually me using a USB to serial TTL cable, a little FIDI cable, plugged directly into one of these boards. And you see it essentially just gives me the numbers that correspond to the HID code. And the final thing is just the character that represents, which I'm mostly throwing away and not actually using on the code of my Tince. So this is like dual coded in both the PIC environment and in an Arduino environment. But let's look at the the HID reports for a second. You see on the table on the left, one for A is essentially 000004, and if I'm not mistaken, that particular one is if I'm holding down just the A. You can actually hold down multiple keys at the same time. Like you see the bottom one, A plus B plus C, that is essentially me holding down A, B, and C key at the same time. And you see there's also modifier keys. For instance, the first bit of code there, the first byte, is essentially used just for saying left and right control keys. So you know, your shifts, control, your alt, that kind of thing. Essentially those come in, and you can translate them, and I'm replaying them back out the USB interface. So now let's actually demo this thing. Yeah, if I put that on a rounded surface, it's certainly not going to stay very well. All right, let's balance that right there. And let me switch over to...
Is that your hand?
Hmm?
Is that your hand right there?
Yes, isn't it beautiful? I should be a hand model, don't you think?
Yep.
All right, let me delete that. And while I've been giving this, I think I've been occasionally using the keyboard as my way of forwarding through slides. So let's actually dump the log. Well, if I type on my keyboard right now, you can see it says test. I'm going to dump my log. Now, there's two ways I can dump my log. You saw from the picture earlier that I essentially have...
Can you make the font bigger?
Huh?
Can you make the font bigger?
Oh, hold on. Yeah, just a second. You see how I have the, down in this corner, this side, the little micro... Yeah, the little micro SD card and adapter. Logging everything to that. So let me go back here. I get better, or you want to make it bigger?
Bigger is always better.
Not well.
For fonts.
How's that? Alright, so I typed in test. Let me actually dump that log out. Now, some of that I actually typed on this keyboard, some of that I typed on my keyboard directly on here. But you see the word test in there, you see the control and the alts, and you notice how I was forwarding through slides earlier? You see the key right, key right, key right, key right, key right. Now right there I just dumped it by hitting a key sequence on my keyboard. I have my payload set on Control Alt L. I could just as easily though pull out that SD card and there'd be a little text file on there that has all my contents. Whatever happens to be easier. For me demoing, it's just a lot easier for me to hit a key sequence than to pull that out every single time I want to show everybody. I also have a key sequence on here where I can hit Control D and delete that log, which of course I had to do because I've been typing passwords on this thing left and right, and yeah. If you look at the log right now, you see the only thing that's in there is the Control Alt L, which I just pressed to actually show the log. But that's just it logging. You see it's logging the keystrokes as type like a oh!
I don't think that was a slip.
Alright, so let's actually throw that back out.
I think you can definitely see the editing involved.
And, yeah, you can see the editing involved and so forth, so there's some more parsing that could be done. This is mostly raw proof of concept at this point. I want to make it a little bit...
Just get the mouse in there, you know.
A mouse logger? Actually, I thought about making one just as a joke because it didn't seem very useful. I also want to implement, sometime I want to implement IP over voice. Say, okay, my packet looks like this. 1 0 0 1 0 1 0 0. But that's what we got so far here. But I also have payloads. One of the things I wanted to do besides just logging keystrokes was vary my keystrokes or vary my payloads based on what people type in. So I have a few different things going on. I have a couple of debug features built into here. For instance, I have a Control Alt Y, which shows me some information like the last few characters I've typed, which I keep in a little ring buffer so I can base payloads on it. I also have where I can store a password. I'll show you that here in a second. And a few other odds and ends. That's just information for debugging. Another debugging thing I have is straight serial interface. So instead of parsing the keystrokes, it gives me the raw HID report for every key I type. This is just, once again, for me debugging, which I found out. I show up at Dave's office and I need to borrow a keyboard because I didn't want to pack one for the flight, and found out that this is a lot less reliable than I thought. The Dell keyboards I mess with have seemed to work, especially the ones I have in my office. Had a problem with HP one, and I had another problem with like a Diebold branded one that has its own little touchpad built in. But let me start typing some keys. Like here's the space key. Here's me holding down left control, Alt, and Shift. Here's the right one, Control, Alt, and Shift. There we go. And you see how basically it's represented by 1 bit. So 7, 1, 2, 4, so 4, 5, 6, 7. Essentially, that tells you where not the right or left controls, alts, and shifts are held down. I've also got to find to recognize things like holding down caps lock and not holding down caps lock. Like type A, B, C, you know. I can hold down multiple keys at the same time, and if you type in enough of those, it actually screws up my HID reader. So I need to mess around with the firmware on this to make it a little bit more reliable. That's raw HID mode just for me diagnosing problems. I can turn that back off, and you see it's still logging keystrokes. Of course, the longer your keystrokes log gets, the more likely it is that you're actually going to want to. That's why I was typing all that gibberish. You see, it gave me kind of odd results. You get really long keystroke logs, you're probably going to want to pull that SD card out and just read it directly. But now let me do a couple of payloads. One of the things I want to do is like screw with what people type. For instance, let's say someone was just typing my name. Just type Adrian, and it automatically adds "is awesome" on the end of it. Because it's that ring buffer I mentioned before, it's seeing that I typed that series of characters, it goes, oh, we'll automatically modify this for you. I can also backspace over stuff to modify things. I started thinking about, well, how else do I do this? Well, I like lolcats, as you can tell from an earlier slide. So what if I made the keyboard force people to type in lol speak? So you can have a cheese burger. And have sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Should translate itself to has. But for whatever reason, it's having some issues there. Also, I did things like duh. I think we'll occasionally change to DEH, TEH. So it does give you a rough idea. Essentially, you can mess around with keystrokes that end up coming in and going back out. It's still logging all the right stuff, but it's not necessarily sending it out to the keyboard. So you can mess with people that way.
Another convincing social engineering employee, you can possibly tell somebody that you could add a function to count keystrokes, just to be able to, count typing speed or something similar.
Yeah.
And convince somebody to put it in just for that feature.
Possibly. I didn't think about doing that, but yeah, possibly. But I'm going to do another thing here. This may or may not work. This has been giving me fits all day. I've been trying to get this code to work.
Yeah, just enter in half your password and it finishes it for you.
I just locked the workstation and I just unlocked it. There's a certain sequence of keys I had to press for that. Control, delete, enter, or control, delete, enter, type something, enter later on to unlock it. Well, I have this in here for just debugging purposes, just to see if it actually got it right. The password I meant to type in was talkpass, but for whatever reason, it's been having issues with this keyboard, and I had it working at home, but not here, and it would not log the proper key sequence. So I'm certain, well, wouldn't log the proper password. You see it put an extra A in there. So I'm going to actually try to type this in again. Alright, so I locked it, control delete, recognize that after the enter and says, okay, I'm going to record this as my password, hopefully. Now if I do, you see it has the word talkpass in there as the grab password. So let's say the user was going to lock the workstation again later on. Now normally you have it set to like 8 hours or something and then log back in. I have it set to 10 seconds for the sake of the demo. At least I think I have it set to 10 seconds for the sake of the demo. So that is essentially the concept behind all this. It still needs work, still needs some reliability. I think at this point a lot of my problems is resting with the firmware on this. And there's some timing issues here that seem to work with my keyboards back in my office, but I've been having issues with other keyboards. So work in progress, but you can see it's making headway. And this version of the code will be on my website shortly. There's versions out there already that will mostly work if you just want to play with it.
Adrian?
Yes.
What I want to say about this, I mean, if you think about the implications of it, I mean, we have to solder this device inside of a keyboard, and when you plug it in, it sits there and monitors when a person's active in there, and if they're not there for, say, 6 hours or 5 hours, it unlocks, drops the payload on the system, compromises, and then it no longer works ever again. So, you can really get pretty suspicious about it. What we do, we did for a recent pen test for a customer is we ship like pretty high-end keyboards, or like the ones that have all the fancy things on it, like can sync up and show display or iTunes display, anything like that. We send it to the IT folks because all the IT folks like get the gadgets and everything, and they usually have domain admin rights. And so we sent 2 keyboards out to IT shops, basically saying, as part of our PC refresh program, we're giving you guys some new keyboards. And of course we plugged it in, and we ended up getting a couple shells back. But the funny part is we sent 2 keyboards, we ended up getting 8 shells back from different people. So my guess is the IT guys were like fighting over the keyboard plugged in different
One of the main reasons for doing the whole integration of both the keylogger and the device together is so I can have more information about what the user is typing. Before, I think Dave and I both been messing around with using like caps lock and so forth, and turning on caps lock and turning it off and telling when it's turned off to say when the user is there. You can also sometimes tell when caps lock or someone's at the been logged in for a while, not been logged in for a while, because when they log into the machine, it will automatically turn on or off caps lock. And I know that Josh, a while back, was messing around with making a PS2 version as well. Though PS2 versions of PS2 keyboards seem to be going the way of the Dodo. Though my main keyboards are pretty much all PS2 still, because I love that.
If you were to make a PS2 to USB converter, for example, into it.
Well, you can do that. People who
I did the keyboard, so it's a PS2 keyboard, and it looked like a USB keyboard.
and you can do that, and I do have the code now for doing that. So if
Adrian
you
got a lot further than I did. I just kind of got some stuff working. Adrian actually made it work both good.
yeah, my PS2 keyboard one seems to work okay, though I haven't tested on enough. It seems to work on the PS2 keyboards I've tried it on, though my IBM Model M, it looks like it sucks up too much power or something. It doesn't quite always work with that one. But yeah, it's a work in progress. And if anybody really wants to see it, I do have a demo of it, but it pretty much I have the exact same payloads, minus that one of automatically unlocking the workstation.
What about having something that could detect when people are there, say in front of the monitor by
Light?
using a light or something?
Actually, we've been doing that. We have older versions of the FUK that I have diagrams for on my website that use essentially well, there's a analog to digital converter.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're using a photoresistor, and we're seeing how it varies by lighting conditions. So you can tell when the light's going on or off in the room, and so on and so forth. And you can also use that as kind of a motion detector when shadows pass. So it is possible, and all Arduino motion detectors as well, that you could hook up to one.
Yeah, Garland, one of my buddies, hooked up a motion sensor, put it in the unlock space in the keyboard, so you can see, when they're there or not. But I mean, what you can do, when you have inline capabilities with USB, is when they stop typing, you wait 5 hours. It's a pretty darn good chance it's not going to be there. You can actually do things like black out the screen so that the screen's off, and then you start doing things. And and what Adrian's showing me, you can do a lot with the Tince device. You can take an executable that's in a hexadecimal form, drop it onto the operating system, convert it back to a binary, and then execute it. So you're actually dropping a full payload on the keyboard execution. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with it.
And Paul's doing more work on this stuff all the time, and I'm using a house adapter I got from Shure Electronics, but he's working on his own USB host adapter to plug on top of the Tince. So I'll eventually probably going to start moving my work over to that. He's also working on having serial and HID at the same time. So it'd be like showing up with more than one USB device at the same time. So you can use that for transferring data, because the HID interface is kind of slow for sending stuff to and from the computer. But serial is going to be faster at least. Not full like USB 2 speeds, but still faster. Alright, more ideas. The Arduino community supports so many different peripherals, so I started thinking I could probably hook up a wireless device sometime like to this. I actually ordered a Bluetooth serial adapter so I can make it so I can grab my logs via Bluetooth. That's getting close, but it hasn't come in yet. Ethernet, it's a possibility, be able to basically have an IP address on the Hardware Keylogger and just grab my logs that way. Timestamping, I mean, there's all sorts of ways out there for like interfacing a real-time clock. Or also, there's code examples out there, sorry, for interfacing a real-time clock, so you can actually tell when the keystrokes were typed. And also, I want to do some work on making it more passive. Currently, this one, unlike some of the other professional hardware keyloggers I have, this one actually does show up as its own vendor ID and product ID. Now, I can set that to anything I want by modifying the code, but I like to even make it automatically do that based on whatever keyboard's plugged into it, just clone that vendor ID and product ID and possibly serial number, or make it just automatically pass everything through. But I definitely don't have it that far along yet. Conclusions and problems solved. Well, I got a homemade hardware keylogger to mostly work. I still want to polish it some, make it reliable for more keyboards. It's got the integrated programmable HID already built in. I can base payloads on that. And the total price, assuming you scrounge around for parts, isn't that high. PS2 unit, about 24 bucks. For the USB one, about $39, depending on what you already have laying around. That's not including, of course, the price of the SD card. Our current problems, like I said before, not passive, so it is showing up with its own vendor ID and product ID, but you can choose fairly innocuous ones, and it probably pass by people's detection. Also, this particular board has problems if the keyboard being plugged into it has a USB hub on board. It won't iterate through those, so it won't enumerate those. So that's an issue. Also, my current packaging I want to get it a little bit smaller and more surreptitious than that. I've actually worked on putting together a proto board. It'd be more about that size, and maybe I can make some get some thermoplastic and make some kind of shell for it. But still a little bit on the large side for what I want. Oh, great. Hold on a second. So, that brings me to the final part, way more links than you ever wanted. And I put in my slides a bunch of stuff to be notes for people later on. A lot of these links are already on my website. Older versions of these slides are already on my website as well, though I intend to put these up also. If you want more information on building these or where to get parts, tons of useful links out there. I have a whole other talk on basically just using the Tince as a programmable head to dump payloads. So I have that talk out there. I also have one whole page with source code where you can download to make this exact board. You want to read up on Paul's Tince Arduino docs, it's out there. If you're messing around with USB devices and you want to see what's plugged in, USB DView from Nearsoft is a nifty app to have. Registrum app is also kind of handy. I was using that for diagnosing where in the registry certain tools were reading from and writing to. Also, Hack5 makes a similar thing to the PHUKD device called the Rubber Ducky. I think the original version was using a Tince, but now they make their own commercial product that does something similar. I haven't played with it though. Sources for more parts, the Tince itself and PGRC. Sure Electronics is where I got this little USB host module. eBay is where I buy a lot of my electronic stuff from anymore, just because I can usually find the cheapest prices. But if you just want photoresistors and other small parts, BG Micro and Mauser I've ordered stuff from before. LEDs, LED Shopping has some nice stuff, though anymore I'm also going eBay for that. For a very small mini USB to normal USB connector, there's actually this one you can get on Deal Extreme. It's that. That's about the smallest one I've found. I think that's the one that Dave and I have both been using for some of our projects. This is so convenient. And if you want a small hub, for some things, if you want to plug in like flash storage at the same time as the Tince, you can take a hub and plug them in parallel to each other. And that those hubs you see with the little twisties, where you can like bend them in circles and so forth, you actually can break the shell off of that and just solder straight to those wires, and it makes a very tiny little hub, so you can integrate more than one USB device into one connector. And of course, a bunch of keylogger links. I've done a bunch of reviews on these keyloggers that you'll read on. And I have a whole other talk on detecting them, different features they have. When you're looking for features, don't worry about storage. Some of the smaller ones only have like 2 megs of storage on them. But think how many keystrokes 2 megs is.
That's
It's
long.
quite a bit. But I have a bunch of presentations and articles on different keyloggers where I was doing reviews of them. Also, I have a paper out there on malicious USB devices and a video on malicious USB devices that talks about things built into Linux and Windows for locking them down and keeping people from installing them. And finally, a little bit about events. DerbyCon. Woo! Yay, DerbyCon! For those who've listened to ISD podcast. This was from this current year. We have the next DerbyCon coming up September 27th to 30th. 27th is going to be a training day. So the main con is going to start on the 28th. Please come on down if you can. And a bunch of other cons I recommend is Louisville InfoSec, SkyDogCon, HackerCon, Freaknik, NotHackerCon, and of course AutoZone. Finally, are there any questions? Yes?
How forgiving is the Tince device to miswirings while you're...
Actually, fairly. I think I've actually got one pretty hot enough though I don't want to touch it, and it's still mostly functioning at the end. I think I did blow out some inputs on it.
Okay.
When we were doing the blackout device, we fried it completely.
You fried one.
Oh, it was burnt to crisp, yeah.
Yeah, the only one I really screwed up, I think maybe was probably mostly screwed up because I soldered wires to it, unsoldered, resoldered, unsoldered, resoldered. When you first messing around with the circuitry, get yourself a breadboard, get yourself a bunch of these jumpers, and play with it that way before you solder anything.
Right, so buy 2 and start with.
I'd
Spend
stop.
$32.
I'd do that, but they are fairly
I like
forgiving.
10.
Yeah. They've been fairly forgiving for me, but I've had screwed up 1 or 2 before.
Okay.
They are. I mean, you know, the problem we were doing with the blackout devices is we weren't doing proper power regulation. So we were sending a ton of, never mind, but it fried and it set on fire and stuff.
That brings me to another question. Did you Do you have to convert it to 3 volts, or can you run it at 5 volts?
Run it at 5 volts.
Okay.
There is a way of converting to 3
Right,
volts.
I saw that online. I was just like,
But yeah, all mine stuff just plugging and getting my power off of USB. It's all 5 volts. Yes.
Have you done any testing trying to get by like safe end or sophos or
No, I've never messed with them. The only USB protections I've really messed around with are UDEV rules directly on Linux and the stuff that's built into Windows. Because you can actually go in there and in security policies, I'm trying to remember what exactly it is now. It's in my article. You can actually go in there and say, let this through based on these criteria.
policy whitelisting?
Yeah.
And the thing is, we have tested them, and if you have the right vendor ID and product ID, you can program the Tince to emulate that vendor ID and product ID, and it circumvents
Yeah.
Sophos or any other ones out there.
You have to edit Paul's libraries,
Yeah.
but it's doable.
There's a few other tweaks that you have to make. We had to go deep into the USB protocol when we did ours, didn't we?
For the product that you did already?
Yeah, the product ID and vendor were header files, but then there was something weird with when the USB protocol initialized. We had to basically change a couple sequence IDs on it. So basically, we looked at all the calls when we plugged in the USB device that it was making, and we monitored the USB connections as it was connecting, and then we compared that to what happened when we plugged in the Tince device. We saw a couple offsets that were weird, so then we went and changed those, and they got around it. So.
Yeah, that's for the whole USB initialization
Yeah.
process, which is just insane.
Yeah.
We're not hardware guys, so it took a while for us to even check what's going on. I did a talk last month, something similar, about using the Tince device and connecting it through serial, connecting it to the keyboard to try to copy data from an SD card without ever initializing it to a hard drive. So it's a way to completely bypass auto-running, completely bypass any protections or anything like that. To still copy data on the computer.
What do you think about the idea of either having all internal USB devices then, or all internal USB ports, the connections, or just putting a USB shut-off switch when we weren't using it?
Well, I've heard of people like epoxying over USB ports, but I hate to destroy a computer in that particular way. I would look more into software solutions for doing it. Then again, if you don't lock down also what they can boot from and keep them from having physical access to get in the machine and rip the BIOS out, rip out the BIOS battery. With extra levels of protection, I don't really like the idea of the physical destruction of the hardware. If you're going to go to that degree, why don't you put some kind of lock, the computer inside some kind of lock box?
Well, what about the idea of doing a keyboard shut-off switch like some of them used to have? Where it physically doesn't allow or where it literally doesn't allow the keyboard to work anymore while the switch is turned?
Well, if you can get people to start manufacturing that.
I don't know, it's sort of related and a little spooky, but I think the research is way off. But there's some studies now where they can actually, I mean, it depends on what keyboard it is, but just by vibrations on the table. I don't know if you saw that.
I've seen stuff about that, and I've seen stuff in academic literature or academic research has been going into that. I have my doubts. I haven't really looked into the ones using vibration. The ones I saw using electromagnetic radiation, they had to go around and turn off the fans and turn off other electronics in the room because everything puts out some kind of EM.
Turn on a fan, you're fine.
Yeah, but I think probably
I have
have
6
accelerometers too. If you're taking on a mobile thing, I think they could probably get some.
Air conditioning, man.
I have my doubts, but I haven't actually played with it enough myself.
I mean, you'd probably be pretty well funded in a state.
And if you get that physically close, I mean, install something on the machine. I'll install one of these on the machine.
Yeah, you've literally got to be in the room or just outside the room at that point. I mean, there's so many other things that can interfere. Even a wall can interfere with a lot of that stuff. So I mean, at that point, you may as well be, running off the window right above them.
Yeah,
You ever heard of a Faraday cage?
You know?
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I was at an embassy in the late '80s. We weren't allowed to do any type of anything confidential on any of the PC stuff.
Yeah, but a lot of the embassies are pretty.
Any of the stuff you had to do, you had to go into the room with the.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want anything with windows in there. Yeah. That's part of the idea because you can detect from.
Well, our office was internal, so we didn't have.
But the funny thing about that is
we still weren't allowed to.
You have people at embassies using things like Tor to tunnel out of the host country, and then people setting up Tor exit nodes and sitting there and sniffing it. like was it Eaglestat did something like that, and I want to say Moxie may have done something like that as well. Not that I've ever done anything like that, because that'd be kind of morally questionable.
I don't know what was possible, all I know is that we weren't allowed to.
Well, yeah, but they tend to go above and beyond
Oh, yeah, maybe.
with expectations.
Also, we're probably dealing with more sophisticated.
And I've heard of government facilities that have basically copper in the walls, act as the Faraday shield to, you know, ground out all the EMF and.
We used to do more, we used to have morning briefings when, I didn't go to them often, but every once in a while, like that, such with my boss. We were in the cage room.
Well, I'm gonna let Dave take on over, and I'm gonna get out of everybody's way. Thank you very much for your time.